It was more like Pascal.
It's sometimes a bit tricky,
She's going.
especially when people change their hairstyle.
Yeah.
We're just waiting.
You went to the over another something.
Okay, I'm just checking. Yes, we've got our Zoom audience here, so that's all good.
Greetings, Zoomers.
Yeah, hello.
Baby Zoomers.
Yes, hello to our Zoomers as well as to our people here in the real audience. Not that you're not real, you are real, believe it or not. Even if you're in lockdown somewhere, you are still real. I think it's important to point that out to people who have been in Sydney for far too long. So yes, we have numbered seating tonight for people who noticed. It's all these strange kind of COVID rules that we have to go by. So thank you for bearing with us through a million emails that we sent out. This may be a pattern that goes on for just a little while yet as we get used to how to run events with particular regulations, but thank you very much for that. Okay, so I'm going to start tonight by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on, in this area, the Yagara and the Turrbal people, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and to any other elders who are here tonight. I'd also like to shout out to people who are zooming in from around Australia. I'd like to pay my respects to the elders from the land that you are on at the moment as well, because this is Aboriginal land all over the country, always was, always will be, and sovereignty was never ceded. So on that note, it's my great pleasure to be hosting this event tonight. And I've got a couple of instructions for people both in the room and in the Zoom room. Firstly, if you're in the Zoom room, there is a chat function, and that function will be obvious because our people inside will send around a link where you can purchase the book for tonight online. So that's a sneaky marketing ploy, but it's also a way of showing you where the chat function is. And that is where you can ask questions at any time, and those will be texted to me here in the room. So the magic of technology will get your question, hopefully, to Steve so that he can answer your question for you. So that will be something you can do at any time during the event tonight. So for the people who are here in the live audience, so anyone who is drinking their fine wine is welcome to do so without their mask on. But we do ask that when you're finished drinking, if you could pop your mask back on. We know that everybody has different levels of comfort with COVID, and some people in the room will be very uncomfortable with masklessness at the moment with the numbers tracking as they are throughout the country. So thanks for doing that for us. The other thing is, for the people in the room, we have a toilet, and that toilet is upstairs. So you just need to find the counter and then go up the stairs that are behind the counter and along the corridor, and that is where that will be. So feel free to use the facilities. We will be having a signing after the event, so please make sure that you join us. The signing table's at the front. And also, if you are here on Zoom, you can call the shop on 3846 3422. You can pay for a book and with postage if you want, and we can get that personally signed for you. Just tell us what you want written in it, or get that personally signed for you afterwards. So the best of all worlds are happening tonight. I think that's all the information that I have to give everybody tonight. So I'm going to just pass over to Stephanie Green. Stephanie is an adjunct fellow with Griffith University and a writer of short fiction, poetry and travel essays, published in Australian and international journals. Her poetry has been recently included in the anthology of Australian prose poetry and the incompleteness of human experience as well. A selection of her short stories, Too Much Too Soon, was published by Pandanus Books in 2006. Her most recent book is a collection of prose poems, Breathing in Stormy Seasons, from 2019. She was born in PNG and grew up in Melbourne and Canberra. She's travelled widely and now lives at the Gold Coast in southeast Queensland, which is why she is free to join us tonight. Everybody, please welcome Stephanie.
Thank you so much. Great to be here. Welcome everybody, live and virtual. And it's just very exciting for me to be here with Stephen Stockwell this evening for a conversation about the voyage and the vision. Before we move into our conversation, I would also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet, the Turrbal and Jagera peoples, and pay our respect to elders past, present and emerging. Well, this is a great moment to launch The Voyage and the Vision and other poems of adventure and enlightenment by Steve Stockwell, my former colleague and friend. Stephen is Professor Emeritus in Journalism and Communication at Griffith University, where he taught from 1996 until 2016. And it's where I first got to know him. Prior to joining Griffith, Steve worked as a journalist at 4ZZZ, at Triple J, and at ABC's Four Corners. He's been a press secretary and a media manager. He's also led a colourful life as a member of the punk band, Brisbane punk band, the Black Assassins.
Yeah.
A subject that we'll come to later. He was on the editorial collective of the Canto Times from 1983 to 91. And as an independent filmmaker, wrote and produced Brain Blast and other experimental community and music videos. Steve has written and edited books and articles on journalism, political campaigns, democracy, and popular culture. And he's recently been exploring the use of epic poetry to tell big stories about colonialism, climate politics, and art. He lives at Burleigh Heads on the land of the Commonberry people, of the Yugambeh people, the Commonberry clan of the Yugambeh people. And I should know that very well because I live there too. So it's just fantastic for me to be here tonight. When I first met Steve, we would often talk about writing as well as work stuff, but I didn't really know that Steve was serious about being a creative writer. But not that long ago, he sent me a manuscript, this thing, and there were a lot of poems, ballads, and other interesting creative pieces, and it was a delight to read them. It's a delight to talk about them with you this evening. Steve, your book's a vibrant anthology of songs and poems, some written recently, some from past creative moments. It starts with the epic ballad that gives the anthology its title, The Voyage and the Vision. It's about the Magellan circumnavigation of Earth during the early 1500s. The book as a whole, but particularly that section of the book, is full of humour, of mystery, adventure, a spice trader's tale told from a different point of view than that of conventional accounts, as one would expect. To get our conversation started, would you please give us a short reading from the first section of the book?
That'd be a great pleasure. And I'd like to acknowledge the Commonberry clan of the Yugambeh people on which land this was written. And this is the first chapter of The Voyage and the Vision. In Goa, I found, much mystery abounds in bars and temples, down dingy dark streets. New worlds emerge from old sights, smells and sounds, as happened to me when out seeking sweetmeats. I'm lost and find this tale I must tell, of antique times and spice and fearsome feats. Near Panjim Market, my nose caught a smell, aromatic, heady, sweet, sour and strong. Then straight away it has me in its spell, and down a dim lit lane I'm dragged along, towards a shop which bafflingly beckons. Transported by that transcendental poem, I enter this old store in a second. Once there, time slows, but here's a stranger quirk. The shop is emptier than I reckoned, given the strength of its olfactorial perk. I'm lost in time mid bare shelves in the gloom. Then everything changes with a jerk. The shop comes alive. Bright light floods the room. The empty shelves are now laden with spice. A man appears and says as flavours fume, I've nutmeg, pepper and cloves for a fair price. You've come from far for treats, this I do know. I have the grandest grains of paradise. Fine fennel, mustard, mace, I've seen them grow. There's cumin, cubeb, saffron, spikenard, and turmeric, a touch the tang will show. This garam masala will goad the bard. My scrumptious cinnamon will make you rave. His manner's friendly, but his looks are hard. Glorious cardamom, his voice turns grave. Brave men have died for this treasure to taste. I see he's dressed as an artful old knave, doublet and hose with sword ready at waist. He's seen action aplenty, and there's no doubt he's travelled far and wide, and death is faced. I have a story for you. It's about the trade in spice and men, and he who dared to find and first complete the round world route. Please sit, he says, as chairs come from nowhere, around a table with a steaming pot, and try my herbs for sensations most rare. Cannabis sativa should hit the spot. Smiling, he lifts a small green-filled glass jar and makes a tasty tea with the whole lot. Oh, yes.
So that gets us underway for what proves to be a great adventure for both the reader and the characters. As you'll see if you read the book, and I do hope you will, The Voyage and the Vision gives us the story of what's known as the Magellan Forage, which started on the 20th of September 1519, when 5 ships set sail from southern Spain with a crew of 270 men.
They're all men.
Maybe they were all men. Only 18 of the original crew members and 1 of the 5 ships returned 3 years later. So it was a difficult voyage, and they returned tattered and worn, but they did something remarkable. Steve, your account is told not in the voice of the famed Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan, nor do you give the point of view of your story to the Spanish navigator Juan Sebastián Elcano, who became the expedition leader after Magellan's death in the Cebu Islands. The narrator of the story is, or the point of view of the story is, instead, to quote you, the true story of the first circumnavigation of Earth by his slave, Enrique. In fact, Enrique was a real person, wasn't he? Who was he, and why did you choose to write from his point of view?
Well, Enrique was Magellan's slave and had been taken by him in the siege of Malacca in 1511. And Magellan took him back to Portugal, and they went to Morocco for a military campaign where there were some questions about Magellan's administration and the corruption involved, which meant that he no longer was persona grata in Portugal, and he ended up in Spain, where he convinced the king to finance the trip around the world and took Enrique with him. And I think I make an interesting case that Enrique is back in Malacca before anyone gets back to the Portugal. And of course, the crucial point is that Magellan dies in the Philippines on his way, and so can't make it that far. And so Enrique is certainly a historical character. He's clearly mentioned in Antonio Pigafetta's account of the voyage, but he's not. We don't know his real name, and so I thought telling the story from the point of view of Enrique was actually making something of a contribution to understanding the real nature of that international history.
Thank you. And that's right, and the biased point of view from which history has often been told, perhaps. Well, the voyage of the Magellan helped to map routes through the Southern Hemisphere and proves that Earth was a sphere, which was one of its incredible contributions. It occurred at a time, in fact, the story that Steve's talking about really suggests that Enrique was at the forefront of that particular discovery. And the voyage occurs at a time when European nations were attempting to extend their reach to seize resources and land for the empire that led to widespread imposition of colonialism around the world. And indeed, that many of us have benefited from today. So with that in mind, thinking about the way that the voyage, in a sense, was one of the early examples of that kind of European expansion, are there any other controversies that surround this particular voyage, Steve?
Well, certainly the question that set me off on the path to tell the story was there are certain people who remember in grade 3 in the Queensland education system, you learned about the first person around the world being Magellan. And so, finding out that he was in fact killed in the Cebu Islands as, really in an act of overreach. He wasn't like Cook in Hawaii. He turned up and misread the situation totally and got himself out of his depth. And I thought there's a valuable lesson about colonialism right there. And, it's kind of interesting we didn't learn that lesson 500 years ago, that, how easy it is to get out of your depth and when you come to tell people what they should think and how they should act, which was very much, what Magellan was doing when he met his fate. And so, yes, I think it's an interesting way into that story and an interesting way to reflect on the problems of colonialism that, to a large extent, we relive now, not only in sort of as a settler community and colonialist apparatus, but in the question of how we use the Earth's resources, that's bringing the whole question, climate change to the fore, and that spirit of colonialism is still being played out in our attitude to looking after the world's resources. And I think it's an important question to go back to, as the story does, particularly in the last chapter. The whole thing's happened because the spice trader, who turns out to be a heretic priest being pursued by the Spanish Inquisition, has come back in time come forward in time to tell us to look after the planet, because he can see what's going to happen.
Yes, the heretic priest, and that's a great vehicle, mechanism for you to unfold this tale. Steve, what kind of research did you do for a project like this?
Well, I was very lucky. I knew from a very early age about Magellan, and sometime in the 90s, I think while I was supposedly looking out for our son, I thought I must find out more about Magellan. And I was living in Bondi, and the Waverley Municipal Library happened to have a copy of Antonio Pigafetta's account of the journey. And so I read it back then, and then it's 500 years ago in July to when Magellan was killed in the Philippines. And I thought for a long time, someone should do something about that and tell the story of what really happened to Magellan, which set me off to return to Pigafetta's journal and to ask some questions and find out what a lot of people in the Philippines and Malaysia will agree with, that Enrique, his real name wasn't Enrique, we don't know his real name, but Magellan's slave was the actual first person to go around the world, giving a totally different idea of the colonial enterprise. Absolutely,
and that's one of the great, joys of reading this work is that shift in perspective. So there are several sections to this book, and The Voyage and the Vision is the first part of it. It's a long, epic poem which tells this journey in lively and imaginative ways. But there are some other interesting sections in the book that I think we should talk about. I'm going to jump now to the later section of the book, which is called Serenissima. And I thought we might start that just part of the discussion with another short reading, if you wouldn't mind, Steve. But before we do, I thought I would ask you what the term Serenissima might mean, if you remember.
Excellent question. Serenissima was actually the name that the Venetian Republic called itself. And the early history is shrouded in the mist of time, but probably sometime around 500 AD, there was a republic in Venice that went until 1779. It was finally conquered by Napoleon in 1797. Yes, that's right. And they called themselves Serenissima the most serene, because whatever situation they got into, they serenely organise their powers to dominate the situation. And the Republic, had interesting democratic connections, and that's why I first got interested in it. And then following through, I saw how the role that the Republic played in developing trade routes into the East, and then through various means into Europe. And so it acted as this centre pin of of trade and culture in the Dark Ages, in that period after the fall of Rome, into the Renaissance, and then various levels of decadent activity until 1797.
Well,
that was a Serenissima.
That's Serenissima. And the full title of this section is actually Serenissima, Allen Ginsberg, Peggy Guggenheim, and Ezra Pound in Venice. And I must say, when I read that title, it just brought an explosion of associations to mind, because these are three very different characters. Would you read us a short section?
Thank you for asking. This is the first chapter of Serenissima, and it's set in the Rio del Greci in Venice in October 1967. The poet awoke, waves slapping the canal with cries and curses from the working men, busy bringing bags from barge to hotel. He arrived late the night before in rain, drank rot gut red with the night porter, and smoked hash to conjure magic with his pen. His challenge was to craft a cleansing chant, to levitate the Pentagon up high, an exorgasm from the hip Hierophant. From Anubis to Zeus he bound the sky, a mystic materialistic formula, 4 elements, 5 sides, the circle pi, American as apple pie mantra, to break the karmic wheel of Nam's slaughter. The thugs stand by to spread this chant afar. Morning now, looking down the water, buildings at strange angles to each other, some confusion between bricks and mortar, as though the builders disagreed, or rather, they did not care which way was up or down. The poet has thoughts of his crazy mother. The workers in their blue boiler suits, brown water heaving, but steady on their boat. The stance of men fated never to drown, pulling at ropes as the concierge hopes the cargo will kiss the piano mobile. The scene now lifts to a higher note. In rays of sun, the poet begins to feel the lack of linearity is not his fault this time, but a different deal. It's not acid or speed or Yage or pop or even the hash from the night before. It's bacteria at work and rot as generations of flood tides made law, when wooden piles on which buildings rested shifted to a formula at their core, and each edifice was itself tested. The poet sniffs life fresh in the salty air and smells the force of history vested. Today holds opportunity rare to reclaim poetry and make it whole by facing the lost master in his lair, to break his silence and restore his goal, to remind him how reverberations found in the skin of our ears touch our soul and change the fate of people and nations. The mad old man had certainly been wrong, but his best work is sheer exaltation, and only he knew how to end his song.
Wow, interesting. When I think of Venice, for me, it's a place that I guess I think of as secretly, if I'm really honest, is a kind of magical city. It's one of the most beautiful places I've been. And I associate many writers and artists with it. 19th century poets like the Brownies went there, but also more recently Italo Calvino, and the way that he evokes a Venice that I recognise, because the first time I went there it was winter and it was filled with fog at the centre of the horrible centre of the canals rising, but somehow spookily creating an atmosphere that I just was so thrilled to experience. And Jeanette Winterson, whose novel, if I can only remember the title, The Passion, was partly set there in a very powerful way, and many others. These three characters that you've talked about in your ballad or poem, here, Steve, they're very unusual characters. What drew you to them? They're three Americans and they're different ages. What drew you to them in particular?
Well, I've always had a thing about Allen Ginsberg. Fun fact, in the 1980s, I was employed as an Allen Ginsberg impersonator at various nightclubs in Sydney, and would lay howl out to the people who wondered what was going on. And so I always loved him. And Ezra Pound is this very interesting character because he was the godfather of modernism in many ways. Edited T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland and made it into the successful poem it was. But who then moved to Italy and became a supporter of fascism and spent 12 or 13 years in a lunatic asylum in Washington as avoiding being put to death for treason at the end of the war. And so he was this quite intriguing character. And the crux of the story is about Ginsberg, Jewish guy, coming to Venice in 1967 to try and get Pound to recant. That's what he's going to see the old master in his lair is about in the first chapter there. And an intriguing story. And around, they were walking past Peggy Guggenheim's palazzo all the time. And she is also this really interesting character, the godmother of modernism in many ways. And I was just intrigued about, them being all there together in Venice in 1967 and what that meant and what had happened there. And that's what set me off to do further research and to put these stories together.
Well, I really enjoyed this section of the book, and you really create a kind of lively sense of what it was like to be in what's a very old city, but nevertheless at a very modern moment. At one point, you would refer to a very funny scene, given when Peggy Guggenheim gives a party, and Allen Ginsberg inadvertently misbehaves. Would you tell us what happened?
The wet towel incident?
Indeed.
Yes. Because like myself, Alan could get a bit sweaty during performance. And so he would sop up the sweat with a towel. And the evening was rolling on and he'd used the towel quite a bit, but left it on the other side of the room and called for it. And Peter Olszewski, his longtime lover, picks up the towel and throws it back to Alan, but unfortunately it veers off and hits Peggy Guggenheim in the head. And she is less than impressed by this activity. She hoped for some fun with the big poets, and it turned rather, sticky at a crucial moment. And so she's shocked and dismayed, and that leads Alan to recriminations of various kinds.
Well, that's what slumming it will get you if you're Peggy Guggenheim. But in fact, she did a great thing for many artists and writers, and she was an interesting character. And I imagine the way that, I mean, she became a fixture of Venice. She was a very important figure there, as she was in America. But I imagine the way that she related to Venice as a place must have been awfully different from the way that someone like Ginsberg related to it.
Well, that's right. She was a princess in the Venetian system, because not only had she come and bought a palazzo there after the war, and this rich American heiress coming, though she worked her entire life, it have to be said, coming to Venice was seen as a great thing. But she brought this art collection, and at the first Biennale after the war, they were trying to put together something impressive. And she turns up and lends her collection of surrealist and abstract expressionists and modernist masters to the Biennale, and that establishes them as a centre for international art excellence at that point that they continue to have until today. And so she was treated as a princess in the town. Ezra, in contrast, was a poor poet. There wasn't much money in these obscure poems that he was not publishing from time to time. And but nevertheless, he was respected as a writer and had this great send-off with the gondoliers, who are communists. The Venetian gondoliers are famous as communists, but they gave this old fascist poet this great send-off out to the cemetery. Alan, in comparison, was a tourist. He was there on a mission. He had something he wanted to do. He'd been as a tourist before and would be again. But in 1997, he had a mission, and that's what we followed.
Yes, I guess that's right, because he was interested in really, as you say, getting Alan to recant his fascist position, and I guess it opened up a whole set of questions. And the historical moment is important, of course, because Europe was about to explode in 1968 with a whole wave of resistance to authoritarianism. So interesting moment to be writing about. Tell me, I know you and Anne spent a bit of time there some years ago. What was your impression of Venice when you were there?
Well, I was very lucky to spend 10 days there in 2007. And not only did I find out at that time about the connections between these folks, but it was also a great opportunity to pretend you were a Venetian. And I think that's one of the great things about international tourism. You can go to anywhere in the world and pretend that you're a local there. And very quickly, the people at the local coffee shop knew who we were and what we ordered, and we became fixtures in a number of bars and cafes and restaurants around the neighbourhood. And so I think it's really great to be able to get into a place and to experience like that. And I hope some of that texture of our experience comes through in the story.
Absolutely it does. I think anyone who reads this will get that sense. More broadly, though, I mean, I'm thinking that a lot of your writing in this book, and indeed maybe more widely, comes from your own travel experiences. What do you see as a relationship between travel and writing for you, particularly in this book?
Well, thank you for saying it's how I related to it, because I've always seen travel as best undertaken if it's got a purpose. And so in the 70s, when I went to Europe for 3 months, it was very much about following the Grand Tour, getting an education, seeing the art and architecture that we heard about at university and actually seeing it, experiencing it. And then, that scarred me, though, because I thought the only way to travel was to be on have a Ural pass and to keep moving around constantly. And in 2002, I had this great expedition across Europe and America, measuring democratic sites, getting the actual dimensions of democratic sites. And we did about 40 towns in not much more than 80 days. And Anne said, I'm never doing that again. The next time we go overseas, we're going to stay somewhere for a length of time so we can get to know it better. And that was a great thing about being in Venice and a number of other places we went to, and learning more about them and getting to grips with the texture of the place. And so I think that's certainly influenced my writing.
Absolutely, and I think when you read the book, you really get the sense of that texture in a very lively and often quite funny way. But I guess exploring ancient travel routes and their importance for understanding the development of human society and culture has been important in your academic research as well as in your creative writing. I'm thinking of your studies of the Phoenicians, and I understand that this interest is given rise to a new creative project. Is that right? The Phoenicians and poetry, how's that coming along?
Well, I've got to admit that for about a decade now, I'd like to say it was less, I've been working on a book about the Phoenician trading routes. I've done some articles about the Phoenicians' contribution to the development of democracy. And it's there's very interesting people that come from the Middle East, Lebanon, Syria, the north of Palestine, and they travelled across the Mediterranean and brought lots of ideas like the alphabet, but also I'd like to argue democracy and science to the West, and made this great contribution to Western culture. But they're only ever mentioned in the footnotes of, being beaten by the Greeks or Romans or various other people. And so for a long time, I've wanted to tell the story about the Phoenician trading routes. And how can I be frank? It wasn't going anywhere. I'd sit down and I'd write, another 10 pages about, this, something that happened here and, what was going on along this coast. And just in the last month, I thought, this poetry caper has been quite freeing of the mind. Why don't I do something with the Phoenicians and poetry? And started writing a number of sonnets. There's no other way to describe them, where I focus on one town or one aspect of Phoenician culture. And so far it's been coming together remarkably well and kind of connecting as I go along, of telling the story of the Phoenician trading routes and their contribution to the development of world culture. And that's been a lot of fun so far.
Excellent.
I have goals.
Yeah, it's good to have goals. But I also really like the way that can serve to bring together, moments of storytelling about each place, but linked through a kind of, geographical narrative in a way, or timeline, but also that it's a creative enterprise. And I really like that part of it. And you've been creative in a number of ways in your career, and we'll come to that in a moment, because I don't want to finish tonight's conversation without talking about the Black Assassins. But before we get to that, this book is really framed by these two long epic poems, and the Voyage and the Vision with Serenissima, and both of them are about, in a sense, speaking back to power, speaking back to privilege. And I just wondered if that's actually an intentional theme of what you're doing here.
Well, growing up in Queensland in the 60s and 70s, it was hard to avoid a certain unhappiness with the political situation of the times. And I guess that's certainly affected my writing. And I'm very keen to draw out stories that look at the nature of politics and go, well, how can we do this different? How can we do this better? How can we understand what's happened in the past in ways that help us improve in the future? And so that's certainly, been a large part of what's prompted me to pursue it. And, the idea that the colonial enterprise, has produced not only this suffering amongst people, but also, in its later stages, is endangering our very well-being through climate change and environmental problems. Makes me think, there are issues I think that we should be concentrating on thinking about. And, my grandson, to whom the book is dedicated, every chance he'll be alive at the end of the century. And I just think, what kind of life is he going to have in the 2090s? That we've got to think about these things now and do things about them now in order to, leave something for the future.
Yeah. Well, that's right. It's late, but it's not too late, as they were saying. So the middle section of this book, there are a couple of middle sections. They contain a wealth of short poems, including some that many of you might already know as lyrics from the Black Assassin days. And you give some context for those in the book with a very short essay about the history of the Black Assassins. Would you just give us a quick nutshell account of that here now, so that anyone here who doesn't know that is aware of it?
That's the legend you're talking about.
Exactly.
And thank you for asking that question on this, the 38th anniversary of our appearance with the Kennedys at Festival Hall. And I'd just like to have a bit of a shout out to the Ahipa Hall that used to be across the way there, where we did a Christmas show that was quite an experience. And I remember the poor cop turning up and going, "We've got to close this down, mate." And I was going, "We've got an acoustic act coming on. They won't cause as much noise." And he said, "No, it's not about that." And so, the Black Assassins were a great opportunity to not only play music and be creative, but also to intervene. It was an agitprop act. It was we spent all the money we ever made on props for the show we put on as part of it, and it was a great experience, and has continued to flourish as time has gone on.
Well, in fact, I believe that the Black Assassins is still alive and well, and a new song release is in the wings. Is that correct?
It's dropping tomorrow night, as the young people say. COVID comes to Sydney. And Andy,
a great title.
big shout out to Andy in the audience tonight, rewrote the words of Death Comes to Townsville, which was about a plan to have a nuclear power plant in Townsville. It didn't go ahead. Could it be the song was that good? And Andy's rewritten the words, and Tony Collins, who lives in Alice Springs, has re-recorded his vocals. But very wisely, I have not very much to do with it at all, except to promote it at every possible opportunity.
Cheers, that's great. That's excellent.
We could go on.
Yeah, you could go on. That's great. No, we will go on. So what struck me about that section of the book, because it is different from the other two. I think the other two have something in common, which is that they're long ballads in a sense, or they're epic stories about something important of a larger nature. And what happens in the middle section is that those poems are still about important social issues or even personal issues, but they're shorter and more compact, and it's a much more text section. But for me, it really brought alive the time and place of, the 1970s and 1980s, memories of music and protest and resistance against corruption and repression, memories of lively rebellion. I have a lot of affection for this section of the book. So reading it, I wondered how much the 1970s and 1980s shaped you as a writer. And I'm especially thinking here about your involvement with that much revered satirical publication, the Canto Times, and in particular the anti-poetry sentiment that was then current.
Thank you for that question.
Good question.
I was so lucky to be involved in the second iteration of the Canto Times between 1983 and 1991. And I don't know about revered. So we certainly didn't think we were very revered at the time. But it was a great opportunity to write, and you had the pressure of your fellow collective members going, well, where's your article? Come on, get on with it. And so, it was great to be part of this thing that, forced you to produce and to write. And I had this idea. I'm going to do something about it. And it was certainly, it worked very well as an organ. It had this life that, because it spoke to people. And there were some great writers who wrote for it, like, Errol O'Neill, and, his taxi stories about Queensland. Go back and check them out because they are so funny and full of, the Queensland life. So it was a great opportunity to, be involved and see things come out. And it wasn't just writing; it was great cartoonists, and they did a great job as well. And it was a real opportunity to produce something in an environment that was, dominated by, shall we say, the culture pages of the Courier Mail, which wasn't particularly great.
Tell me a bit more about the anti-poetry sentiment, though.
Oh, yes, that's right. Well, we were against many things, and one of them was poetry. And all I can say is you have the right to change your political position. And if I'd known if there'd been more stuff like the Voyage and the Vision around, I would have second thoughts, I'm sure.
Yes, the right inspiration needed. Absolutely. But, I guess poetry for me has always been closely connected to music, to lyric, because, that's part of the origins of the form. And although I personally write a lot of prose poems rather than verse, the lyrical quality of poetry, how words are put together, their rhythm, and the spoken form of poetic writing, that's still really vital. So I wondered if you thought of some of your pieces as more songs than poems. And if you do that, how much your experience of songwriting might have influenced your writing this book?
Very much. Some are songs, and some are waiting to become songs. If there's any musicians in the audience, feel free. I see that there's this connection between songs and poetry. It goes back to Homer. He starts, by going, "I've a song to tell you," and so that line between poetry and music was, not at all clear. And, the troubadours who both Ginsberg and Pound admired greatly, who brought, who laid the framework of what we now call poetry. They were singers. They sang their stuff. And so, there's this connection that goes back a long way. And for me personally, one of the deep connections, I think, is the work of the bard, which I've written about in my academic work, as well as, in some popular stuff I've done. But the figure of the song person who kept the society, kept the community, kept the tribe together with songs is still quite, an amazing character and an amazing figure, and explains a lot about the way, the way we are now, the people that we are, why we love music, why we love songs, what their function and role is. The work of the bard is really important, as I admitted in some of those poems going back through them, you know, I see myself as a bard being engaged in political writing, political constructions, you know, and I'm very lucky to late in my career have the opportunity to attack things in a more creative fashion.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you have time and that we have an opportunity to read them. But apart, as well as song and words, I was also rather enchanted when I read this book with the illustrations that are dotted about through it. And there are a number of gorgeous ones. I particularly like this Allen Ginsberg one, 1967, Ginsberg. And I don't know where they come from, but it sort of makes this book even more enchanting. It's whimsical, it's touching to see these images, and they really give it a kind of three-dimensionality. Where did you get some of the drawings from, Steve?
Well, how can I say that? They're flagrant copies of, you know, a collection of photos that I found of, you know, I'd go looking for things and then, you know, copy very closely and, you know, keep the pen on the paper was my approach to copying the images that came there. And, and it was kind of good because I had Parkinson's disease, and so one of the things that's a real challenge is keeping your hands steady, and so it's been quite a challenge, but, you know, also a good fun way of attacking that issue to do the drawing.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I found that there's not just something very personal about the illustrations. So even if they're sourced from the research, they also bring a kind of individuality to the book, I think. So I really enjoyed them. But look, Steve, before we finish tonight and hand over to the audience to ask some questions and comments, may I invite you to read once more from perhaps from your Black Assassin days, if you would read a short piece.
Thank you very much for that opportunity. Here's Planet X. Earth's a drag and you're on your way. Cover a lot of space in just one day. Speed of light, speed of sound, lost in space and then you're found. You come down on a planet near a big pink sun pouring out fear. You look for meaning, but it's not clear. There's no purpose and there's no text, and you never know where you're next on Planet X. There's creatures there and they're real strange. They've got nice minds, but they're out of range. They hang out in trees and dance in drains, eat funny seeds, drive plastic planes. They come up real close and lick your face, eat your ego that won't leave a trace. They've got no concept of personal space. They'll fuck you on the slightest pretext, and you never know when you're next on Planet X. At first you're confused, then you're annoyed. Then you find out it's all random in the void. You begin to like it, and next thing you know, you move right in and never go. Life's so easy and there's only one rule. Don't use other people as your tool. Don't miss out or you're the fool, because there's only one place for the oversexed, and you never know what you're next on Planet X.
Hooray! Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Steve. That was a really, really great way to finish this conversation. It's been a joy to be here with you and to see all of you. Thank you for being here. If there's any questions from the floor or from our Zoom participants, that would be great.
Yeah.
Shall I hand over to you?
Yeah, I'll just read the one from the Zoom audience that I have so far. So Hayley has said, what is the most important message that we should take from the book? Messages from the book.
Thank you, Hayley. Well, I'm reminded of Aldous Huxley, and he said it's kind of embarrassing after years of exploration of consciousness and philosophy that all I've really come up with is it's a good idea to be kinder to each other.
Yeah.
And I guess that's, you know, at the very basic level, what I'd like to think that the book offers is an opportunity for people to rethink about the ideas that they've received, and to reconsider their lives and what they do, and to help build a kind of place.
Very good. Right. Any questions from the floor?
I've got a question. So, Steve, I know that in your background that there was a very, very strong anti-poetry stance that I've heard about all these years. Personally, I'm so pleased you're using your powers for good now, and have turned to poetry. Yeah. But it interests me that you are able to keep creating in a long creative life. Like I was there at Brain Blast, and I just watched you make a huge movie, and I was astounded at the amount of work and how cool you stayed through dealing with so many different people and challenges. And I just wonder how you keep creating even now that you're so excited about turning the Phoenicians into your next epic ballad. Where does that come from? Do you reckon? What was the secret to that?
Well, I think that it's the secret of being a writer is getting up and doing it, every day, writing down something every day, and it is kind of amazing, what you can get if you do that. And so, I think it certainly has a lot to do with the work ethic inspired by my mother and father, but also the idea that they had that you should get on and do what you wanted to do and not whinge about it so much. And so I think that they're actually have made a great contribution to this book. I thank them. They're both passed away now, but I thank them in the book because there's something very good about going, well, I'm going to do something today, and at the end of the day there's something there that wasn't there before. It's kind of good.
Wow.
Any other questions from the audience?
Can I ask a question about a specific poem
Excellent.
called Hands Off Hecuba,
Yes.
which starts, she certainly looked like a goddess. There's a life to the poem, if you read it all, that makes one think that there's some sort of big stimulation behind the writing of it. What inspired the story?
Well, the idea of Hands Off Hecuba came because it was a piece of graffiti under a railway bridge in Corinda, as I recall. And someone had written Hands Off Cuba, and some wag had come and put HE in front of it. And I was always impressed by this
Classic scholar.
palm pest of graffiti going on here. And then I found out more about Hecuba and thought, interesting person, because, let's tell the story from her point of view. Because in the end of the Trojan War, she was given to Ulysses as his concubine. She'd been the wife of Priam, the king of Troy. She's given as a concubine to Ulysses. But after a while, she's so much trouble. She's such high maintenance that he goes, oh, you stay here. I'm going off to do other weird stuff. And so I thought, I just wanted to look at the world from Hecuba's point of view.
Okay. Very
Hands off.
We've got time for one more question if there is one here. Was that a question? No. It's hard to tell with masks on when someone's actually just. Any questions from the audience?
Can we go now?
Oh, that must be Will Steve.
Yeah. Very much for great having this crowd here.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Oh, sorry,
I was just going to thank Avid Reader for having us here.
Thank you.
Avid Reader does such a great job keeping the book thing alive.
Thank you. We are going to go for the signing very soon. So to make that happen in the best COVID safe way, everyone's been so good with their masks. You are the best COVID safe audience that we have had. So thank you for that. We're going to let Steve out first, just so he can get to his table. So you can come out and talk to him after that. So we might get Steve out first, and then we'll join him at the signing table, and he can sign books. The books are at the front counter, and yeah, we'll see you out there. So great, thank you guys.
My wine that I'll be drinking very slowly.
All right.
Yes, I think you were both. So you did very well.